Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Virtual Sunday School. Well, here in America, this is the time of year when we talk about things that are spooky and ghoulish and macabre. Well, a lot of you probably don't realize that there are some pretty spooky stories in the Bible, and I'm going to tell you one of those stories in today's episode. Now, before we get into the story, I've got to introduce you to somebody, and that somebody is a person named Daniel. Now, at the time that the land of Israel was overtaken by some kings, there was a particular king named Nebuchadnezzar. Boy, there's a big name to remember, huh? Now, King Nebuchadnezzar was being driven crazy by this dream, this terrible nightmare that he was having. And he couldn't figure out what this dream meant. So he called all of his wise men and his sorcerers and all of these people to help him interpret this dream. And nobody could do it. So in the kingdom, there was a man named Daniel who was a prophet from God. And Nebuchadnezzar knew that. And he called Daniel into his court and he says,
"Can you help me interpret this dream?"
And Daniel said, "I think I can help you." And Daniel interpreted the dream for him, and the king realized that the dream came from God. And God was telling him,
"King, you have sinned and you need to return back to me."
And that's exactly what the king did, and his kingdom prospered. Many years later, King Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, King Belshazzar, there's another name, unlike his father, he was a party animal. And so he spent most of his time partying and looting and just doing crazy things, and he wasn't taking care of the people in his kingdom. So one night, Belshazzar decided,
"You know what? It's time to have another party, but I'm going to have a really crazy wild party."
So he went to his bank vault where he had all of his riches, and he was going through that, and he found these chalices. And you know what a chalice is? It's what we use for Holy Communion. And these had been stolen from the temple in Israel, and he ended up using those to drink from during this huge party. So later that night, Belshazzar had his huge party, and the people at the party were saying,
"Oh, Belshazzar, this is so cool. These cups are so much better than red Solo cups. I mean, they're shiny and they're bright. I love drinking out of these cups."
Now, all of a sudden, in the middle of the party, everybody stopped, dead in their tracks. And Belshazzar was wondering what's going on. And he turns, and what does he see? He sees a disembodied hand floating up by the back wall. And all of a sudden he watches as this hand scratches this message onto the wall. So you'd think that a disembodied hand scratching a message on the wall would be terrifying enough. But no, what was even more terrifying was what the message said. Mene, Mene, Takul, Ufashim. Now, nobody could understand, including Belshazzar, what this meant. So just like his father, he called all of his priests and his sorcerers and everybody and his wise men to come and see if they could interpret this, and nobody could, because it wasn't Greek, and it wasn't French, and it certainly wasn't Klingon. But then Belshazzar's grandmother, remembering back, said,
"I think I know somebody who can interpret this message for us, and that's the prophet Daniel."
And so Belshazzar brought Daniel in and said,
"Can you interpret what this writing on the wall means?"
So Daniel looks at the message and he says,
"You know what? You're right. It's not Greek, and it's not French because French hasn't been invented yet. And it certainly isn't Klingon because they're not going to arrive until the 23rd century.
Now, Daniel, as a prophet of God, knew what each one of these meant. The first part, mene, means to count. And Daniel interpreted that as,
"Belshazzar, your kingdom's days are numbered."
Meaning that his kingdom was going to be conquered by another force. Now the second part, tekol, that means to weigh. And Daniel interpreted that by saying that Belshazzar's sins were so great that it had weighed down his soul. And the final one, ufarshin, that means divide. And Daniel interpreted that to mean that Belshazzar's kingdom would fall and be divided amongst his enemies. And so this prediction ended up coming true. And that night, Belshazzar's kingdom was overtaken, and Belshazzar, along with his people, died. Okay, so what can we learn from this story? Well, one thing for sure we can learn is that if you see a disembodied, floating body part writing something on your wall, you're probably in big trouble. But seriously, as Orthodox, what we take away from this is the importance of learning from our mistakes. Nebuchadnezzar made a mistake. He did a bad thing, but he recognized his mistake and he came back to God. But Belshazzar didn't learn the lesson that his grandfather learned, and in fact, it's even worse, he ignored the lesson that his grandfather learned. So what we want to do as God's children is we want to learn from our mistakes so that we don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, and we do what is right before God. In fact, you may hear some people say, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's exactly what happened in this story. And that's the lesson that we want to take away from this. And another thing you may have heard people say is, and the writing's on the wall. And that means a clear sign that something bad is going to happen. And certainly in our story today, it couldn't be any clearer than the hand scratching the message on the wall. So thanks everybody for watching. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.